The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250. Access Fort Wayne is a department of the Allen County Public Library.
Today I will be discussing several movements that have occurred within our American society. Right now we're in the throes of the Black Lives Matter movement. This movement started, I would say, several months ago, but recently has just garnered international attention. With the death of George Floyd, many Americans are now seeing how important civil rights are, and it doesn't. Whichever side of the coin you are on, civil rights has again become an issue, in our American society. I think that most people have a good understanding of history. They understand that civil rights has always been a hot topic within our society, but some Americans don't realize that recently there have been movements outside of the Black Lives Matter movement that have really pressed for important civil rights for Americans. And today I'm going to discuss two such different distinct movements that have civil rights written all over them. One will be the March on Washington, and the other will be the Stonewall Rebellion. Both of those different movements are a little over 50 years old now. The March on Washington occurred in 1963, August 28th, 1963, and the Stonewall Rebellion occurred in June of 1969. And so, these both movements occurred in the 60s, and it was just a time of political unrest in our country. Once again, 50 plus years later, today we are seeing that there's political unrest. And so it goes to show you that history, in a sense, does repeat itself. Each of these movements have captured the nation's attention, and Americans have been affected negatively or positively. The March on Washington occurred August 28th, 1963, and it has its origins, I believe, as early as the 1930s. There were leaders such as A. Philip Randolph that came together, and they were concerned with labor issues and rights for African Americans. And so, fast forward to the 60s, there were issues all over the world. I know in down south, in Birmingham, Alabama, blacks were, wanting the right to vote, down south, and they were wanting to be able to sit at lunch counters, and, they were just looking for equal rights, in housing and, education. And so I know that A. Philip Randolph, and there were other leaders, I believe Bayard Rustin was another person, that came together, and they, put this march together to protest and ask for civil rights. One important reason the March on Washington was affluent. It marked the 100th anniversary of blacks being freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, and also the success of the Birmingham campaign, which resulted as a result of the SCLC. They fought to bring, as I stated, those worldwide integration issues in Birmingham. And so what I liked about the March on Washington is that, it brought so many groups of people together. It was very multiracial and cultural. People gathered at the Lincoln Memorial, and I mean, there was the young and old alike. You had people that, everyone was affected, by, wanting equality. And there were lots of celebrities, that, used their celebrity platform to come together. People like Marlon Brando and Sammy Davis Jr. and, they just all believed in equal rights. And there were speeches. Everyone knows, of course, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech at the March on Washington. And, everyone's familiar with that speech, his hopes for America. And, he made it quite personal and relatable, to each American, those basic civil rights, that people, born in this country, hope to have, the freedom to live where they want, the freedom to go which school, that they want to go to, the freedom, if you're qualified for a job, or to work where you want to work at. And so that was very important, because at that time it was such segregation, in the South, and all over the world. And between 200 to 300,000 Americans attended this march. It was held in our nation's capital at the Lincoln Monument. And at that time, I believe it was one of the largest political gatherings, in U.S. history. And so, as I stated, Americans were drawn to those ideas of equal civil rights in housing and educations and jobs. And it brought about the Civil Rights Act, of 1964, which outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and/or gender or national origin. And it prevented unequal application of voting registration practices and prevented segregation in schools and jobs and in public places based on race. So because Bayard Rustin and Dr. King and Dr. Ralph Abernathy, these leaders had this vision, to bring the nation together, we got a Civil Rights Act, and people, even today, don't understand, well, protesting is a waste of time and da-da-da-da-da, but protesting done in the right way can bring about change. And the March on Washington showed that it brought about change, and those leaders, and even ordinary citizens didn't give up. They knew in their hearts that change could occur, and so it's still, very relevant today, with all that's going on in the world. I also want to discuss something that's, also another movement that's, relatable to the American public. I stated it would be the Stonewall riots, and I think that I don't know if most Americans know about the Stonewall riots, but Pride Month is celebrated in June all over the world, and it's not only for the LGBTQ community, it's also for allies, whom could be parents or, other students and adults. And so I just think that, we need to really give an ear, to this community. And so the riots began in June of 1969, June 28th, and police arrived at the Stonewall Inn, which was a bar, for gays and lesbians in Greenwich Village in New York, Manhattan, New York. This bar was actually owned by the mafia, and it catered to, various patrons, in the LGBTQ community. The police arrived to raid out, this bar, and they historically had always, targeted the LGBTQ community, because at one time it was against the law for the community to convene, in public places. And so the police, historically would always pick on this particular community. And so they arrived at this bar, and there were patrons that night that said, no, we have a right to gather. We're going to, we're minding our own business, we're not hurting anybody, and we're going to gather. And so there were riots. They didn't back down this time. They stood and they fought the police. And the riots from June 28th to July 3rd occurred. It spilled over into the streets. And as a result of these riots, the community began to, establish places and bars where they could be open regarding their sexual orientation and not fear being arrested. And, it was just important, that they occurred, because now, there's the LGBT community, has flourished. There's same-sex marriage, and one can be open at their job. We see that there are celebrities, that are openly gay, and there are, politicians. At one time this year, there was a gentleman that was running for president. And so had it not been for that particular movement, or that rebellion, the LGBT community may not enjoy the freedoms that they have today. And I think that's important, that we remember, that there is an origin, to things. And, people have, paid with their lives, to get to where we are today. And I just think that a lot of those people, like Marsha Johnson was born a male, but transitioned. And Marsha Johnson fought for, the right, to be able to convene, in these public places. And there were so many other people, within the Mattachine Society, which was actually one of the first national organizations for the LGBTQ community. I believe it started nationally in the 50s, but its roots, go back, to the 30s. And there have been so many people, entertainers. I think of, it was Black Music Month, I saw online. In June. It's been celebrating in June for many years, and I think of so many entertainers. Notably, one of my favorite singers. His name was Sylvester James, and he was born in Oakland, California, in 1948. And he was born within the church. And he left the church because he knew that he was different, and he knew that, the church would not accept him being different, but he was very gender fluid. I saw something on Amazon Prime recently, a video that celebrated him, and he dressed, in women's clothes. And at times, when he performed, and other times he wore, men's clothes, but he always said he was just who he was, and that took a lot of courage, in the 1970s and early 1980s, to be out, as an entertainer, because many people weren't, And, this guy was on, national shows like Merv Griffin or Dinah Shore. I mean, these were national talk shows, and, performing, with his background singers. And he, ironically, I heard he wasn't allowed to perform on Soul Train, which was, everyone knows Soul Train, Don Cornelius hosted Soul Train, and, everybody in the black community knows that he was deemed to be too flamboyant, for Soul Train, and he was African American, and they rejected him. But, he had a lot of courage, and, he had a lot of fans, and I've even heard that Sylvester, came here, to perform downtown. But I think that young people just seem to forget, that, we stand on the shoulders of heroes and heroines, and everyone else in between that, have fought hard, and lived and died, for the freedoms that we enjoy today. You must never do that. And you must be appreciative, of the people that come before you. And so that was really the goal today. I wanted to, talk to more, younger Americans, because this Black Lives Matter movement, it's very inspiring, because you see a lot of young people, and, you see blacks and whites and, different races, and people are fed up and tired, with the police brutality. But I think that they're unaware, the young people, that there were different, movements. There's a women's movement. Women, for years have fought for equality and are still fighting for equality, and sectors, different sectors, whether it's business, employment is what I'm trying to say. They want to be on the same pay grade as men. Women, this country is, close to 400 years old, and women just didn't get the right to vote to 100 years ago. So women have had a hard time, when, there's a feminist movement, and there was a Million Man March, and, all these different, the Me Too movement, which is now really took off and has changed, the way people are approached, in business and in entertainment, and, so change is good, when these movements, they have to occur, because we have to evolve. That's what the world about is evolving, and this country has always evolved. It has not, it's not stood still. It's constantly moving, and so I can just hope that, within this Black Lives Matter movement, that, it brings us all together, and not tear us apart. It sadly, I see, as it plays out, you have groups of Americans say, you have the Confederacy and the white supremacists, they put their needs, and then you have the black people put their needs, and it's like it's dividing, and it should not be. Police have brutalized everyone. Certainly, they've brutalized more African Americans, but we just need to come together. In order for this country to thrive and continue, we're going to have to come together. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping, with our next presidential election, that whomever gets in office, that they make the steps, to take the steps, should I say, to bring us all together. And people, we have to watch our words. Words have power, and it is, I think one of the best things about living is to have an opinion, of your own, because Lord knows I'm very opinionated, but we have to watch the words that we put out there, because people are influenced. People can take your words and do all kinds of things. They can use them against you. And so we don't want that. We want inclusiveness, in this country. And that's what the March on Washington was about. And that's what the Stonewall riots was about. I mean, there were people, different races, in both of those sectors, and they were bound, by their civil rights, wanting their freedoms. And so, this is what we have to remember. And I'm grateful, in spite of it all. People talk bad about America, but I am grateful to live in a country, that has achieved as much as it has, and we're young compared to countries in Europe, and all over the world, and Africa, countries in Africa. I mean, we're a baby, compared to those other places, and we've come a long way. We still have a way to go, but we've come a long way, and but you're never on top enough to where you can't do better. You can always do better. And so I wanted to educate the young people today, and I hope that, we all just walk away knowing that people, at the end of the day, they want to be loved, and they want to be acknowledged, and they want to be heard. And I think that those people within at the March on Washington and, the Stonewall riots, people want to be acknowledged. People want to be acknowledged, whether you believe in them or not. Listen, you may not always agree, but listen, and you just might learn something, that may help you along the way. I'm remembering those people today, Dr. Martin Luther King. I am certainly remembering Marsha P. Johnson. I'm remembering Sylvester, and all those people who have fought, lived, and died, to enjoy the freedoms that I have today. Thank you. I can remember that vividly. I was in the 6th grade, and this man, was just literally beaten by the police, and it had made it to all the talk shows and all over the news. And I can remember children that I went to school with, some of my peers, African American children, laughing at that, and I chalk that up to immaturity, but this man was beaten by the police, and it was captured on tape, at that time, VHS, those camcorders. And so this is nothing new, and sadly, Rodney King was scarred after that, after that beating, and ended up dying, several years ago after, he had battled substance abuse, and he had almost drowned in a pool, and all of these things and such. But it is real. The brutality is real. And, I chalk it up to, some people believing that African Americans are still less than and lower. And the anger that they feel, towards African Americans. And, I could never imagine, disliking or hating someone that much, because of their skin color, because they can't help that, people don't get to put in an order, before they're born, because if that was the case, one of the first things I would have said was, I want to be rich, so, and you're going to have those people that say money doesn't buy happiness and all that, but I trust and believe it would have helped me, so, and so it still amazes me, but it's, we know that it's the way one is taught, and um, but anyhow, the brutality is real, and but the good thing about it is now that there are people, the younger generation, um, is seeing how important this is, and they are marching. There's Caucasians, and there's Asians, and there's Black people, and Indians. People are uniting together. And that's a beautiful thing. I saw it all over the world, even in England. I saw it, and I've always loved the accents over there, and people now see how serious it is, and they're just not standing for it anymore. And because these laws and have been into place. There was at one time, on the census, you guys, the census is done every 10 years. Blacks were thought of as chattel, or property. We weren't considered to be people. And and I'm not trying to be funny, and I have to watch my words, but they were owned, by their masters, Caucasian masters, thought that, and for centuries it was believed to be that. So I believe a lot of that attitude, that hatred, is still left over from those days, and you can see it, that the prejudiceness is real, and I've always been one to say, I don't care what color, if they're qualified, give them a fair shot, but people don't see it that way, people don't see it that way, and so it's not just police brutality, but it's, it's in education, it's in business, it's everywhere, but this movement is starting to bring people together, and so I had an elderly gentleman come up to me the other day in my place of employment, and he was Caucasian, and he was in his 70s, he told me, in other words, he just didn't know, how bad that it was, but he's glad to see that things are changing. And he told me, even here in town, he had gone to a high school here that is well known, and that's still standing today. And he told me that he had graduated in the early 60s, and that there was one girl that, was in their class, but she was bullied out because she was Black. And he had told me when he had gone into the military, he was in Detroit, laid over, and he was with one of his buddies, whom was Italian, and they were, I guess, on the street, trying to go shopping or get something to eat or something, but those different streets was for certain ethnicities. One was the Black street, and the other was where the Italians went, and da-da-da, and, and I just could not imagine that, and so, he told me that he's glad that, things are starting to change, and I was like, wow, for someone to quote that's been in the dark so long about, this issue, that he's glad to see that it's changing. And so, change is occurring, people, you hear people say that it's not, it's not happening fast enough, or what took it so long, but you just have to be thankful, that it is occurring. And, that makes me feel good, because I just could never understand that. I remember starting school, with primarily white, children, and my whole life educationally, I went to school, with, more whites, and I did Blacks, and I can so remember wanting them to like me, and accept me as an equal, and not look at my color, and I always, now sitting here, what I remember about that is because they weren't taught to consider others, other than their own race. I went to school primarily down south, and I did finish high school back east, but those Caucasians weren't, most of them aren't taught to consider other races. And I remember here in town working for a Caucasian couple, and she told me, yeah, they didn't think about, black people or talk about, our customs and things like that. So that's why I felt the way I did, because that was a reception I was getting. So, but now, people are, the good thing about, the world is that it's changing, and people are, races are more starting to intermingle. And, we had things in common all along, but people were, just, they were too scared to admit that, or, they just didn't want to get involved with each other. But now you see it, that I went to PFW, and, now that the campus is so multiracial and cultural, and you have kids serving in organizations together and working together, and which is good. It's good. And so if anything, with Black Lives Matter, I want that face of police brutality to be shown, and I want it to be eliminated, and I want people to love and work together and appreciate each other. And then I know that those big changes in those different sectors, whether it's housing or education, they will eventually occur, but we got to knock down our attitudes, and blacks say that whites are guilty, of certain things, but blacks are guilty too, in their attitudes. No one is above the next person. We all got to work together, and so I'm hoping that this movement puts a face on that.